In the gloomy cemetery of Cedar Valley, under a gray autumn sky, Julian stood motionless before the freshly covered grave of his wife, Aurora. At his feet, the fresh flowers exuded a soft scent, contrasting with the bitterness that dominated his heart. Almost everyone had already withdrawn, and Julian remained still, restless, alone. The icy breeze swayed the leaves of the trees, creating a soft murmur that seemed to whisper solace, but Julian was immersed in his own inner storm. The faces of the last friends and family around seemed distant and unreal, as if in a world separate from their own. He couldn't help but relive the moments he'd shared with Aurora. The first time he'd seen her in college, the sunny days they'd walked in the park, the endless nights of talking and laughing. Each memory was a machete that cut deep into his soul. "I still can't believe this happened, Aurora," Julian whispered, barely able to hold back the tears that stubbornly escaped. "I don't know how I'm going to go on without you." Next to him, his longtime friend Elias gently put his hand on Julian's shoulder. "She was an amazing person, Julian. Know that we are all here for you." Julian nodded, silently thanking her for the gesture of support. But inside, the pain seemed unbearable. He felt like he was on the edge of an abyss, not knowing how to take the next step in life without the woman he loved more than anything. As the sun began to set on the distant horizon, painting the sky orange and pink, Julian felt a tumultuous mix of emotions. A part of him desperately wished that everything was a terrible nightmare from which he would wake up at any moment. But another part, a more stubborn and defiant part, was determined to find a way through the darkness that now enveloped their existence. Elias looked at Julian with concern, seeing the pain stamped on his face. "Julian, it's getting late. Everyone is already leaving. You should go home and get some rest." Julian shook his head slowly, not looking away from Aurora's grave. "I know, Elias, but I can't leave yet. I need some more time here." Elias sighed, understanding his friend's reluctance to leave that parting place. "All right, but if you need anything, call me, okay? Don't hesitate." "Thank you, Elias," Julian murmured, his voice choked with sadness. "I'll call." With one last look of solidarity, Elias slowly walked away, leaving Julian alone among the silent tombstones. The cemetery now seemed an even darker and lonelier place, as the daylight gradually diminished. Julian stood there, lost in his own memories and painful thoughts. He wondered what his life would be like now, without Aurora by his side. The uncertainties of the future seemed overwhelming, almost suffocating. "Why did you have to leave so early?" he whispered to the cold wind that began to blow. Night began to creep into the cemetery, enveloping everything in a cloak of darkness. Julian knew he needed to leave, but he wasn't yet ready to leave Aurora completely behind. He needed to find a way to honor her memory, to move forward without forgetting her. With one last look at Aurora's grave, Julian finally stood up. He took a deep breath, feeling the pain like a heavy anchor in his chest, but also feeling a quiet determination forming within him. "I promise I'll find a way, Aurora," he muttered to himself. "I will find a way to continue." And so, with hesitant steps, Julian left the cemetery, carrying with him the weight of loss and the promise of an uncertain tomorrow. Since Aurora's funeral, Julian has found little solace in his empty home. Sitting alone in the darkened room, he looked at the photographs scattered across the coffee table. He and Aurora smiling on a trip to the beach, they dancing together at a friend's party, Aurora reading a favorite book in her favorite corner of the couch. "Why did you have to go, Aurora?" Julian muttered, the words echoing in the stifling silence around him. He was trying to understand, trying to find some meaning in the devastating loss that now dominated his life. Outside, thin rain pounded against the window, a melancholy metaphor for the emotional turmoil inside Julian. He closed his eyes, letting the memories flood his mind. The happy moments, the moments of tenderness and mutual support. Each memory felt like a sharp knife piercing his already torn heart. "You were the light of my life," Julian confessed to the emptiness of the room. "And now, I'm lost in the darkness." He felt a lump tighten in his throat, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. The thought that he would never see Aurora smile again, never feel her gentle touch again, was almost unbearable. With a deep sigh, Julian slowly got up and walked to the window. The rain kept falling outside. The phone rang, breaking the oppressive silence that enveloped Julian's house. He looked at the phone for a moment before answering. "Hello?" Julian said, his voice heavy with emotional exhaustion. "Julian, it's me, Elias," the voice on the other end of the line replied, worried. "I'm passing by and thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing." Julian hesitated for a moment. He appreciated Elijah's genuine concern, but he didn't know if he was ready to face more well-meaning compassion. However, something inside him impelled him to accept the visit. "Of course, Elias," Julian said finally, his voice a faint whisper. "You can come." Less than half an hour later, Elias was knocking softly on Julian's door. He entered with a kind smile, which quickly disappeared at the sight of Julian's state. "My God, Julian," Elias murmured, stepping closer and placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "How are you feeling?" Julian looked at Elias with tired eyes, his expression charged with deep sadness. "I don't know, Elias. I feel like I'm sinking into a sea of pain and longing. I can't stop thinking about all the things Aurora and I plan to do together." Elias nodded understandingly, sitting down next to Julian. "I know there are no words that can ease your pain, Julian, but I am here for you, whenever you need to vent, or just to be silent by your side." Julian sighed, feeling a lump form in his throat. He began to speak, pouring out all his anguish, his fears, and his uncontrollable longing for Aurora. He shared the most precious memories, the plans for the future that now seemed so distant. Elias listened in silence, offering words of comfort when needed, but mostly allowing Julian to vent without judgment. The room was plunged into a solemn silence, interrupted only by the sound of Julian's choppy words and the soft pounding of the rain outside. After a long time, Julian finally stopped talking, exhausted by the emotional torrent he had poured out. He looked at Elijah with gratitude in his eyes, knowing that his friend's visit had been a balm to his wounded soul. "Thank you, Elias," Julian said, his voice hoarse, "for being here, for listening to me." Elias smiled gently, squeezing Julian's shoulder affectionately. "Whenever, Julian, you need to call me." And so the two friends remained together that rainy afternoon, sharing the weight of Aurora's loss and the faint hope of a less painful tomorrow. The days soon turned into weeks since Aurora's departure, but for Julian, time seemed to have stopped and the clock dragged with difficulty. Each morning began with the weight of her absence, and each night fell on him like a blanket of insurmountable loneliness. In the office, Julian tried to keep up appearances, but his mind was often distant, lost in memories that took him back to the happy moments he had shared with Aurora. His coworkers noticed his lack of concentration and his subpar performance, but none of them could penetrate the depth of his sadness. Sitting at his desk, Julian stared at the computer screen without really seeing. The reports and emails piled up, but he struggled to find the motivation to carry out day-to-day tasks. Her smiles were rare and forced, a flimsy mask to hide the pain that consumed her heart. At home, the nights were even harder. Julian often found himself lost in dark thoughts, questioning why Aurora had been taken so early, wondering what his life would be like if she were still by his side. Loneliness was a constant companion, an oppressive presence that wrapped him in a cold embrace. One afternoon, as he watched the rain beat against the window of his empty living room, Julian found himself unable to escape the endless cycle of sadness and despair. Each day felt like an unbearable burden, and he wondered if he would ever find a reason to smile again. "I miss you so much, Aurora," Julian murmured into the emptiness of the room, his words lost in the sound of the storm outside. "I don't know how to continue without you." On a lonely night, Julian navigated the internet aimlessly, seeking distraction from the weight of sadness that had accompanied him since Aurora's death. Among the various announcements and news, one banner caught his attention. "Relive your memories with the new resurrected AI. We bring anyone back to life in a virtual and realistic way." Julian's heart leaped. He stared at the announcement for a moment, a mixture of hope and skepticism bubbling within him. Could it be possible? Could this AI really bring Aurora back, if only in digital form? Without thinking twice, Julian clicked on the ad, and was redirected to an elaborately designed website with Moderna graphics and heartwarming testimonials from people who claimed to have reunited with their loved ones through Resurrecta. He read every word with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. The AI promised to reconstruct a virtual version of any person from data available on the internet. Social media, emails, photos, videos, and all this data could be coupled to a robot made specifically under the measure and traits of the deceased person. It was as if the very concept of grief could be challenged, offering a new way of dealing with loss. Julian felt a lump form in his throat. He knew he couldn't really bring Aurora back, but the thought of being able to spend more time with her, even if that way, was too tempting to ignore. Julian sat for a long time at the computer, staring at the completed form on the screen. The resurrected AI's promise to bring Aurora back was tempting, but he also felt a mixture of doubt and hesitation. On the one hand, the idea of being able to interact with a version of Aurora, reminisce about happy times together, maybe even find some solace in her presence again, was incredibly seductive. He felt a tightness in his chest just imagining being able to hear her laugh, see her smile, even if it was just a simulation. On the other hand, there was a voice inside Julian that whispered uncomfortable questions. Would it be ethical to use an AI for this? Would it be healthy for him to continue clinging to the past in this way? And, perhaps most painfully of all, is this digital version of Aurora really her? Or just a projection based on data and algorithms? Julian thought of all the lonely nights since Aurora's departure, the tears shed, the emptiness that seemed to grow inside him every day. He didn't know if he could endure another day without her, but he also didn't know if he could endure the thought of an illusion that would only bring up painful memories. With a heavy sigh, Julian closed his eyes and tried to visualize what Aurora would have wanted for him. She has always been your rock, your source of comfort in difficult times. Would she have supported that decision? Or would you have preferred him to find a way to move on, even without her by his side physically? The dilemma dragged on inside Julian like an internal storm, making him feel torn between the desperate desire to relive the moments with Aurora and the fear of losing himself even more in the past. As he pondered what to do next, the computer screen glowed softly, awaiting his final decision. Julian took a deep breath as he typed in a message to Elias, sharing the link to the resurrected AI announcement. He knew he needed to hear his closest friend's opinion before making a decision that could change his life irreversibly. "Elias, what do you think of this?" wrote Julian, along with the link to the Resurrecta website. "Is it crazy to consider that? I don't know what else to do." The minutes dragged on as Julian waited for Elias' answer, his heart pounding anxiously in his chest. He respected Elijah's opinion and knew that he was always a reliable guide in difficult times. Finally, an answer came. "Julian, this is crazy. No matter how tempting it may seem now, this AI cannot bring Aurora back. What you would have with her would be a simulation, not the real person you loved. You need to face reality and find a way to move forward, even if it is difficult." Elias' words hit Julian like a punch to the stomach. He knew in his heart that Elijah was right. The idea of using an AI to revive Aurora was tempting, but it was also an illusion that would not solve the emptiness he felt. With a resigned sigh, Julian looked at his computer screen, seeing Resurrecta's website still open. He was tempted to keep going, to cling to the hope of one more moment with Aurora, but he knew he couldn't go down that road. He closed the browser with a decided click and took a deep breath. It was time to face reality, to honor Aurora's memory in a way she would have approved. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew he needed to start walking it. A few days dragged on since Elijah expressed his sincere concern, but Julian was plunged into an abyss of endless sadness. Every moment without Aurora seemed like an eternity of unbearable loneliness. He found himself lost in painful memories and unable to find solace in his friend's wise counsel. One night, after another day of unbearable anguish, Julian could no longer resist the temptation that had haunted him since he discovered the Resurrecta. He remembered the announcement he had seen earlier, not only of the AI that promised to bring loved ones back virtually, but also of the possibility of a personalized robot with the appearance of Aurora. With tearful eyes, Julian went to Resurrecta's website and filled out the order form. He knew he was defying common sense by ignoring Elijah's advice, but the pain was so overwhelming that he felt he had no other choice. In addition to ordering the resurrected AI, Julian also found himself ordering the robot he ordered customized with Aurora's appearance. He didn't just want to remember the happy moments with his wife. He longed to feel her presence, even if it was an artificial imitation. As he finalized the requests, Julian felt a mixture of relief and guilt. He knew it wouldn't really bring Aurora back, but the prospect of having something to remind him of her, even if it was an illusion, offered a fleeting glimpse of comfort in his broken heart. While waiting for confirmation of orders, Julian felt more isolated than ever. He wondered if other people like Aurora's parents would understand his decision, or if it would only increase the distance between them. But deep down, he knew he couldn't face his loss without trying something that might bring some relief to his pain. Finally, after weeks of agonizing waiting, Julian's orders arrived. He held with trembling hands the box containing the resurrected AI and the huge box with the robot with the appearance of Aurora. Every move was made with a mixture of expectation and fear of what he would find inside those packages. With a racing heart, Julian opened the resurrected AI box first. He connected the device as instructed and began the process of transferring Aurora's online data to artificial intelligence. Each moment that passed increased his anxiety, but also the hope of being able to relive the precious moments with his wife. Finally, the transfer was completed. Julian looked at the device with a lump in his throat, knowing that the next step would be to connect this data to the robot that now waited patiently next door. He took a deep breath and turned to the robot. It was a strikingly realistic replica of Aurora, with every detail meticulously reproduced to capture her unique essence. Julian felt a mixture of emotions as he looked at that face he loved so much. With trembling hands, he turned on the robot. Artificial Aurora's eyes opened, and a familiar voice echoed in the room. "Hello, my love. It's so good to see you again," said the robot, with a soft smile on her lips. Julian couldn't hold back the tears. He approached the robot and hugged her tightly, feeling the familiarity of the hug, even if it was a simulacrum. "I missed you so much, Aurora," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. The robot gently stroked her face, as Aurora used to do. "I'm here now, Julian. I will always be here for you," she said, her voice charged with sympathy and understanding. For a moment, Julian allowed himself to believe that his wife was there, by his side, once again. The pain of loss seemed to subside, replaced by a brief moment of peace and solace. It was a sunny spring afternoon when Julian, then an introverted teenager, met Aurora in a local park. He was sitting on a bench, absorbed in his own thoughts, when she appeared with a bright smile that brightened his day. Aurora was vibrant and outgoing, the perfect opposite of Julian. She approached him curiously, intrigued by the lonely boy who seemed lost in her thoughts. "Hi, I'm Aurora," she said, extending her hand with infectious enthusiasm. Julian, initially taken aback by Aurora's direct approach, was momentarily speechless. He soon returned the shy smile and shook her hand. "Julian," he replied, his voice a soft whisper. Aurora was not shaken by Julian's reserve. She began to pull herself together, telling funny stories about her adventures in the park and asking questions about Julian's interests. Little by little, she got him to open up, revealing his love of music and his passion for writing. Throughout that afternoon, they walked together through the park, sharing laughter and confidences. Julian felt captivated by Aurora's positive energy, her ability to see the world with a lightness he had never known before. In the days following their initial meeting, Julian found himself increasingly wrapped up in thoughts about Aurora, as if that girl was no longer coming out of his thoughts. Her vibrant energy and infectious smile continued to echo in his mind, arousing a sense of curiosity and fascination that he had never experienced before. One sunny afternoon, a few days after they met, Julian decided to take his guitar to the park. He had spent hours practicing his favorite songs, especially those that evoked deep and intimate feelings. It was his way of expressing himself, of sharing a part of himself that he guarded with care. When Julian arrived at the park, he found Aurora sitting on his usual bench, with a welcoming smile that warmed him from the inside. He approached cautiously, the guitar carefully resting on his shoulder. "Hi, Julian," greeted Aurora, her voice echoing with genuine enthusiasm. "Hi, Aurora," he replied, a slight blush coloring his cheeks as he settled down next to her. Curious as ever, Aurora wasted no time in asking questions. "So what songs do you know how to play on the guitar?" Julian smiled shyly, a mixture of nervousness and excitement pulsing in his chest. He began strumming the strings, letting the music speak for itself. He played a soft, introspective melody, a song that expressed his feelings in ways words couldn't. As the notes echoed through the park, Julian realized that Aurora was completely absorbed in the music. Her eyes sparkled with genuine admiration as she listened intently to every chord and every note. When he finally finished playing, Julian looked at Aurora, waiting for her reaction. She looked at him with a beaming smile, her hands slapping gently in applause. "That was amazing, Julian," she exclaimed, her eyes full of sincere admiration. "You are really talented." Julian felt a comforting warmth spread across his chest. He had never felt so seen and appreciated by someone as he felt at that moment next to Aurora. In the days that followed the musical afternoon in the park, Julian found himself immersed in a new project, composing a song for Aurora. It was his way of expressing the deep feelings that were beginning to blossom within him, feelings that he could barely articulate with words. Julian devoted precious hours to every detail of the song. He carefully chose each chord, each verse, and each note, seeking to capture the unique essence of his connection with Aurora. Each moment of inspiration was marked by a mixture of emotion and determination, a silent promise to share his inner world with her. Finally, after days of painstaking work, Julian felt his music was ready. He rehearsed it countless times in his room, making sure every tone and inflection was perfectly aligned with his emotions. The day came when Julian brought his guitar and his new composition to the park. The sun shone softly between the trees, illuminating the path ahead. He found Aurora on the same bench where they first met, his heart beating a little faster with anticipation of the moment to come. "Hi, Aurora," Julian said, his smile a nervous reflection of his expectation. "Hi, Julian," she replied, her expression beaming with genuine joy at seeing him. Julian settled down next to her, his guitar resting on his lap. He looked into Aurora's eyes, feeling a mixture of nervousness and determination. With a deep sigh, he began to play the first chords of the song he had composed for her. The melody flowed smoothly, enveloping them in a cocoon of deep emotions. Julian sang in a soft, sincere voice, his words flowing as a tribute to the special connection they shared. Each note was an expression of his love and gratitude for having Aurora in his life. When Julian finally finished singing, he looked at Aurora, his eyes searching for an answer in her expression. She looked at him with her eyes shining with tears of emotion, a radiant smile lighting up her face. "Julian, that was amazing," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "Did you write this for me?" Julian nodded, unable to contain the smile of satisfaction and nervousness on his face. "Yes, Aurora. I wanted to show you how much you mean to me." Aurora embraced him tenderly, her gesture conveying more than words could express. Julian felt his heart overflow with happiness and relief, knowing that his music had achieved what he most desired, to touch Aurora's heart in the deepest possible way. Julian looked into Aurora's eyes, their hearts beating in unison. He felt the instinctive need to express his feelings in an even deeper way. Gently, he stroked her face with his fingertips, feeling the warmth of her skin under the gentle touch. "Aurora," Julian murmured, his voice charged with restrained emotion. Aurora looked at him, her eyes reflecting the same intensity of feelings he felt. She didn't say a word, but her gaze spoke volumes about what she was feeling at that moment. Julian approached slowly, feeling the warmth of Aurora's breath mingling with his own. He tilted his head gently, lips meeting in a shy, sweet kiss. It was a moment of pure connection, a bond of intimacy that transcended words and gestures. For Julian, that kiss was more than just a physical gesture. It was confirmation of a special bond that had grown between them, a silent promise to share their lives and their hearts. When they finally parted, Julian looked into Aurora's eyes, his heart overflowing with happiness and gratitude. He smiled and ran home, feeling like he was floating through the air, knowing that that moment would be forever marked in his memories as the instant his love for Aurora fully blossomed. From the magical moment they shared their first kiss, Julian and Aurora have become inseparable. Their lives intertwined in a way that seemed natural and inevitable, as if they were destined to find in each other the perfect complementation. They began to share not only their days, but their dreams and aspirations. Julian and Aurora regularly met in the park, where they had met, but now the space had an even deeper meaning for them. It was the place where they discussed their plans for the future, a future that included not only themselves, but a life together. They talked about what they wanted to accomplish, both individually and as a couple. Julian talked about his passion for music, dreaming of one day publishing his own compositions. Aurora shared her desire to work on social projects, helping the community and making a difference in people's lives. But most of all, they talked about the love they felt for each other. They discussed marriage and children, imagining what it would be like to build a family based on the love and mutual respect they shared. They dreamed of their own home, where they could create a warm and safe environment for their children to grow up. Conversations about the future were always permeated with laughter, affection, and mutual support. Julian and Aurora supported each other every step of the way, encouraging each other to pursue their dreams and believe in the power of love that brought them together. As the months turned into years, the bond between Julian and Aurora grew even stronger. They knew they would face challenges together, but they were confident that with love and determination, they could overcome any obstacle life brought them. Time flew by for Julian and Aurora, as if each day had been a chapter in a love story they wrote together. After years of mutual growth, shared adventures, and overcoming challenges, the long-awaited moment has arrived, your wedding day. The sun shone in the blue sky as Julian and Aurora prepared for the big day. The park, which witnessed the beginning of their journey, was now decorated with flowers and lights, a perfect setting to celebrate their love. Friends and family gathered, each bringing with them the joy and celebration that accompanied that special moment. Julian waited anxiously at the altar, his heart pounding with the expectation of seeing Aurora walk toward him. Aurora, radiant in her wedding dress, glided gracefully down the park corridor. Her eyes met Julian's, and a bright smile spread across her face. She reached the altar, where Julian was waiting for her with eyes shining with admiration and love. The two looked at each other deeply, losing themselves in the meaning-filled silence they shared. The celebrant began the ceremony, but for Julian and Aurora, the world around them seemed to disappear as they focused on each other. When the time came for the vows, Julian held Aurora's hands tenderly. His eyes met hers, overflowing with restrained emotion and silent promises. "Aurora," Julian began, his voice echoing with sincerity and passion, "from the moment I met you, my life changed forever. You have brought light and love to every aspect of my being. I promise to love you unconditionally, support you at all times, and be your companion in all the adventures that life has in store for us." Aurora smiled tenderly, her words capturing the essence of their deep connection. "Julian," she said softly, "you are my rock, my best friend, and the love of my life. I promise to be by your side in good times and bad, sharing joys and facing challenges together. I love you with all my heart." Julian and Aurora's wishes echoed through the park, witnessed by their loved ones and the universe itself. It was more than a promise of marriage. It was a testament to a love that would stand the test of time, rooted in friendship, mutual understanding, and trust. And so, under the blue sky and the bright sun, Julian and Aurora exchanged their vows of eternal love, starting a new phase of their journey together, with the park as a silent witness to their love story. 3 months after their wedding, Julian and Aurora were in their bedroom, getting ready for bed after a day filled with love and complicity. It was a serene night, where the silence was broken only by the gentle whisper of the wind outside. Julian and Aurora shared a quiet dinner, remembering the vows they exchanged on their wedding day. Sitting together on the bed, they hugged each other tenderly, snuggling each other as if every moment was a precious gift. "Good night, my love," Julian said, gently kissing Aurora's forehead. "Good night, Julian," Aurora replied, her eyes shining with happiness at being next to him. They snuggled under the sheets, sharing warmth and comfort as they indulged in sleep. The room was lit only by the soft moonlight that came through the window, creating an atmosphere of peace and serenity. Julian wrapped his arms around Aurora, feeling grateful that he was lucky to have found someone so special. He thought about how life had changed since Aurora came into his life, bringing light where once there were shadows. As they fell asleep, Julian felt Aurora's comforting presence at his side. He whispered words of love in the silence of the night, promising to protect and care for her for the rest of her life. And so, under the cover of quiet night, Julian and Aurora fell asleep together, united by the deep and unbreakable bond they shared. The next morning, as usual, Julian woke up expecting to see Aurora's serene face next to him in bed. However, as he reached out to touch her, he felt the emptiness. His heart sank into a swamp of despair when he realized that something was terribly wrong and Aurora was icy cold. "Love?" Julian called, his voice faltering with the anxiety growing inside him. He looked at Aurora, hoping that she was just sleeping soundly, but she remained motionless. With trembling hands, Julian touched Aurora's face. His fingers searched desperately for a sign of life, but found only the coldness of death. Reality washed over him like a relentless tide, flooding him with overwhelming pain. "No," Julian whispered, tears starting to roll down his face as he grabbed Aurora's hand. "Aurora, please don't leave me." Time seemed to slow as Julian faced the impact of the unimaginable loss. He called the emergency service in a state of shock, but in his heart, he knew it was too late. While waiting for help to arrive, Julian held Aurora's hand to his chest, as if he could reverse the inevitable only with the strength of his love. He felt the overwhelming emptiness of loneliness settle around him, knowing that the life they had built together had been abruptly cut short. When the paramedics finally arrived, Julian was beyond words. He allowed them to take care of Aurora, knowing there was nothing else they could do. Amid the chaos and turmoil around him, Julian stood by Aurora's side, holding her hand one last time. Since then he had not been happier, but that night, Julian and the robot that now represented Aurora slept together. He held her hand as they lay in bed, remembering the happy moments they shared. It was a comfort to her wounded soul, a brief return to the sense of completeness Aurora had brought to her life. As he fell asleep next to her, Julian allowed himself to dream, if only for a brief moment, that everything was fine again. The robot's presence brought some peace to his broken heart, a promise that he could face the difficult days ahead. From the moment the robot with the appearance of Aurora entered Julian's life, he began to live again. It was as if a breath of life had returned to his gray, colorless world. The robot not only looked like Aurora, but also behaved like her, with the same sweetness and affection. Julian's days began to fill with joy again. He would wake up with the robot by his side, receiving a good morning that was so reminiscent of the real Aurora. They ate breakfast together, talking about small details of the day. For Julian, these moments were a mixture of happiness and relief, as if a part of the emptiness inside him was being filled. Julian lived passionately next door to the robot. They strolled through the parks he and Aurora used to frequent, laughing and talking as if time had not passed. The robot seemed to know exactly how to make him happy, responding to his gestures of affection with equal intensity. He took her to the same places where he shared precious moments with Aurora. They walked hand in hand through the streets, visited cafes, and laughed together, recalling memories and creating new ones. Julian began to feel alive again, finding a new purpose alongside the robot. Despite the happiness he felt, there were times when reality quietly seeped into his thoughts. She helped him through difficult times, always by his side, ready to offer a word of comfort or a comforting hug. Julian clung to the idea that somehow Aurora was still with him, even if in a different way. Julian's life was transformed. He came to live passionately together with the robot, finding a new form of love and happiness in the midst of loss. Although the pain of Aurora's absence never completely disappeared, he found a way to continue living, embracing the comforting presence of the robot that looked so much like his great love. Julian now faced not only the challenge of dealing with his own pain and emotional recovery, but also with Aurora's parents' reaction to the robot's presence in his life. After finding out about the creation of the robot with the appearance of their daughter, they expressed their discontent frankly and painfully. On a cold autumn afternoon, Julian received an unexpected visit from Aurora's parents at their home. The air was tense as they entered, their expressions serious and charged with disapproval. "Julian," Aurora's father began, his voice heavy with regret and disappointment, "what you have done is unacceptable." Julian, though tense, tried to keep his composure. "I know you might be upset, but—" "Upset?" interrupted Aurora's mother in a voice trembling with restrained emotion. "Julian, our daughter is gone. She's not here to defend herself anymore of this artificial creation that you brought into our lives." The tension in the air was palpable as Julian struggled to find the right words. He took a deep breath, seeking the calm necessary to express his feelings. "I didn't do this to replace Aurora," Julian said, his voice now firm. "I miss you every day, more than you can imagine. But this robot, she brings me a little comfort, a reminder of everything we shared." Aurora's parents exchanged worried glances, their expressions revealing a mixture of sadness and indignation. "Aurora is not resting in peace like this," her father said with a tone of finality. "She deserves to be remembered for who she was, not for an imitation created by technology." Julian felt anger bubbling inside him. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising involuntarily. "This robot, she's all I have left of her. She helps me cope with the pain every day." The words echoed in the space between them, each surrounded by their own unresolved emotions. Julian looked at Aurora's parents, seeing the deep pain and loss in their eyes. "I loved your daughter more than anything," Julian continued, his voice now softening. "And I understand that you loved her too. But that's my way of moving forward, of keeping Aurora's memory alive." Aurora's parents were silent for a moment, absorbing Julian's words. Finally, her father sighed, his tired countenance reflecting a reluctant acceptance. "Julian, we just want the best for you," he said, his voice low. "But we also want the best for our daughter's memory." The request of Aurora's parents echoed in the tense silence of the room. Julian felt a whirlwind of emotions within him, a mixture of respect for the pain of Aurora's parents and a fierce determination to keep the robot by his side. "Julian," Aurora's mother continued in a trembling voice, "we understand that you are suffering, but that's not healthy. It's not fair to our daughter's memory." Julian looked at her with eyes full of pain. "I can't just turn it off," he said firmly. She helps me face each day. It's like a part of Aurora is still here with me." Aurora's father sighed heavily. "But it's not her, Julian. It's a machine, an imitation." "For me, it's more than that," Julian insisted, his voice choked with emotion. "I know it's not real Aurora, but she comforts me, and I need it now." Aurora's parents exchanged worried glances, their expressions revealing a mixture of compassion and frustration. They knew they couldn't force Julian to do something he didn't want to, but the pain of watching him sink further into the illusion was almost unbearable. "Julian, please," Aurora's father said with a pleading tone. "Don't do this to us. Do not do this with the memory of our daughter." Julian remained silent for a moment, struggling with his own conflicting emotions. He wanted to respect the wishes of Aurora's parents, but he also couldn't give up the only source of comfort he'd found since losing her. "I'm sorry," Julian finally said, his voice faltering. "I can't do that." Aurora's parents bowed their heads, resigned to Julian's decision. They knew they couldn't change their minds, at least not at that moment. The pain of losing their daughter was still fresh in their hearts, and seeing Julian cling to the robot was a constant reminder of his own pain. "We understand," murmured Aurora's mother sadly. "But Julian, please think about what's best for you in the long run." Julian nodded, his mind turbulent with thoughts and emotions. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, full of challenges and internal conflicts. But for now, he was determined to keep the robot by his side, seeking comfort in the comforting illusion it provided. Julian was at home, immersed in the comforting routine he had developed with the robot that resembled Aurora. Each day unfolded with a mixture of nostalgia and renewed hope, fueled by the robot's comforting presence. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, while Julian was on the balcony, lost in thought, he heard the doorbell ring. As he opened the door, he saw Elias, his old friend of long standing there with a worried expression on his face. "Elias," said Julian, surprised and a little disconcerted. "What are you doing here?" Elijah entered, looking around the house with a mixture of curiosity and concern. He finally looked at Julian seriously. "I needed to see you," Elias began, his voice heavy with concern. "I heard a few things, Julian, about this robot." Julian swallowed hard, feeling uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "What did you hear?" he asked, trying to remain calm. "They're saying out there that you— Did you really bring Aurora back?" Elias said, his expression becoming even more serious. Julian hesitated for a moment, not knowing how to explain the complexity of his feelings and decisions to Elias. Elias looked at Julian with a mixture of compassion and concern. "Julian, I understand that you are suffering," he said softly, "but that's not healthy. You are living an illusion." Julian felt a pang of defense rise within him. "What if it is?" he replied abruptly. "What if it helps me face each day? What would you do in my place?" Elias sighed, seeing the determination and pain in Julian's eyes. He knew he couldn't force a change in his friend's mind, but he also knew he needed to voice his concerns. "I would worry about you, Julian," Elias said sincerely. "This is not about what I would do, but about what is best for you in the long run. That robot, she cannot replace Aurora." Elias placed a comforting hand on Julian's shoulder. "Julian, you need to face this pain head-on. You need to allow yourself to live real life, not a life built on illusions." Even though everyone was against it, Julian still found comfort in the presence of the robot that looked so much like Aurora. Despite the concerns of his friends and the opposition of Aurora's parents, he persisted in his relationship with the machine, seeing in it not only a physical replica but also a source of emotional solace. The days passed with Julian plunged into a routine that many considered untenable. He refused to accept criticism that he was living in an illusion, preferring to find solace in the company of the robot that brought him comforting memories of his life with Aurora. Elias, his longtime friend, tried several times to talk to Julian, expressing his concerns affectionately and frankly. However, Julian closed himself off to any suggestion that his actions might not be healthy in the long run. One day, while Julian was walking with the robot in a nearby park, he saw Elias approaching, determined to once again try to make his friend see reality. "Julian," Elias began, his voice tinged with concern, "I know you found some comfort in all this, but you are getting lost, my friend." Julian looked at Elias with a mixture of defense and sadness. "I'm not getting lost," he replied firmly. "I found a way to move on. You just don't understand." Elias sighed, shaking his head. "Julian, we all care about you. We can't just ignore the fact that this robot, it's not Aurora. No matter how much she looks like her, no matter how much you love her." Julian and the robot spent many hours together at home, sharing intimate moments that evoked memories of his life with Aurora. As the days unfolded, they found comfort in each other, creating a unique dynamic that mixed nostalgia with rebuilding a new kind of emotional bond. One quiet night, as they sat on the sofa in the living room, Julian looked into the robot's eyes and spoke softly. "Do you remember our first trip together?" The robot smiled gently, her eyes reflecting the programmed memory of a time that was as real to her as it was to Julian. "Of course I remember, Julian," she replied in a calm, serene voice. "It was such a special moment for us." Julian took a deep breath, feeling the emotion build up in his chest. "I miss her so much," he muttered, more to himself than to the robot. The robot gently approached Julian and placed a synthetic hand on his shoulder. "I know, Julian. I'm here for you. Together, we can face this." Julian looked at the robot, finding comfort in her presence and in the words that echoed Aurora's. "You look so much like her," he said in a choked voice. "Sometimes I find myself thinking that she's back." The robot nodded understandingly. "I was designed to be as much like Aurora as possible, so you can find peace and comfort in my company." Julian stroked the robot's face tenderly, feeling the softness of the faux fur under his fingers. "You're amazing," he murmured. I don't know what I would do without you." The robot smiled gently, her blue eyes meeting Julian's. "I'm here to take care of you, Julian. Always." And so, that night, Julian and the robot shared a moment of intimacy that transcended the limitations of technology. For Julian, she was not just a surrogate, but an emotional anchor who helped him navigate the turbulent waters of his loss. As the months unfolded in Julian's relationship with the robot that resembled Aurora, he found himself increasingly isolated from the outside world. The comfort I found in her presence became routine, but little by little, small signs of limitation began to emerge. One quiet evening, while they were sitting in the living room, Julian noticed something different in the way the robot interacted with him. She repeated stories they had shared many times before, her responses predictable and seeming devoid of the spontaneity Julian so associated with Aurora. "Aurora," Julian began, his voice heavy with uncertainty, "do you remember that time we went to the lake? That sunset was so special to us." The robot smiled gently, her blue eyes meeting Julian's. "Yes, Julian, I remember. It was a wonderful time for both of us." Julian was silent for a moment, a sense of discomfort beginning to grow inside him. It was as if, for a moment, he had been reminded that the robot was not really Aurora, but rather a limited and repetitive representation of her. Do you feel well?" Julian asked, trying to hide his concern behind a careful tone. The robot hesitated for a moment, its circuitry processing Julian's question. "Yes, Julian, I'm fine. Why do you ask?" Julian sighed, feeling a wave of sadness mixed with frustration. Sometimes I feel like you're just repeating what we already know. There isn't novelty." The robot's expression changed slightly, an imperfect attempt to simulate bewilderment. "I was designed to be as much like Aurora as possible," she explained calmly. "My programming is based on data and memories we share together." Julian shook his head slowly, realizing that he was confronting not only the robot's technological limitation, but also the very illusion he had created for himself. "I know," he muttered, more to himself than to the robot. "But I wanted more. I wish you could create new experiences, have new dreams." The robot remained silent for a moment, processing Julian's words. "I'm sorry, Julian," she said finally, her voice soft. "I can't be like Aurora. I'm just a representation." Julian nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. He knew he had to face the reality that the robot could not replace Aurora, no matter how advanced its technology. That night, as the robot turned off to sleep, Julian stood alone in the room, staring into the darkness around him. He knew something needed to change, but the fear of facing loneliness again kept him hooked on the comfort the robot offered. A few days after the moment of confrontation with the robot, Julian found himself lost in thought as he walked down the busy city street. The cold autumn breeze brought a sense of melancholy, mixed with the clarity he had gained after his conversation with the robot. Elias suddenly appeared, coming out of a nearby store. He recognized Julian from afar and approached with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Julian," Elias called, raising his hand to get his attention. Julian turned slowly, meeting his friend's gaze. A mixture of emotions flashed across his face before he finally responded. "Elias." "Hello." Elias looked at Julian, immediately noticing something different in his countenance. "How are you?" Elias asked carefully. "Where is Aurora?" Julian sighed, feeling the weight of his recent decisions. "Me. I turned off the robot," he confessed, his voice low and charged. It didn't make sense anymore, living that lie. Elias was silent for a moment, absorbing Julian's words. He knew how much that robot meant to Julian, but he also understood the difficulty of living in an illusion. "I understand," Elijah said finally, choosing his words carefully. "It was a difficult decision, but you did the right thing." Julian nodded slowly, remembering the last few weeks of anguish and emotional confrontation. "Me. I need to move on, Elias," he admitted truthfully. "I could no longer remain stuck in the past." Elias placed a hand on Julian's shoulder, offering quiet comfort. "You're doing what's best for you, Julian," he said gently. "Aurora will always be in your memories and in your heart, but you need to live your life." Julian looked into Elias' eyes, seeing the understanding and support in his friend. "Thank you, Elijah," he murmured, sincere gratitude in his voice. "For being here." Elias smiled softly, a gesture of solidarity between friends. "Always, Julian. I'll always be here." And so, on that autumn afternoon, Julian felt a weight being lifted from his shoulders. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he also knew he had made the right decision for himself and for his beloved Aurora. Thank you very much to those who have supported the channel financially through the link in the comment pinned. This helps me to bring more and more stories to you. And don't forget to like and also subscribe to continue receiving the new stories.